So welcome to another Masters with Masters. We're here at the Kennedy Space Center at the newly named Neil Armstrong building, and it's great to be here. And we are basically coming together to share different lessons and insights from masters and distinguished practitioners who have a long history of working in the aerospace business. And we'll have an open engagement. We also have an audience here who will have opportunities and questions that we'll get into shortly. First, I'd like to introduce Mike Ciannilli, who's been working at NASA for over 18 years. He has been involved as the test director and NASA landing and recovery director for several activities and programs. Has been involved in terms of launch countdowns and operations. Also has been prepared for pre-launch, launch, and landing mishaps that may take place, and has also been actively involved in the capturing and the sharing of critical lessons from the NASA and the Kennedy history. So we welcome you, Mike.
Thank you, Ed.
And we also have Jon Cowart here, who has been at NASA for several decades, a few decades, and now is actively involved in NASA's commercial crew integrated capability activity. He's working and leading the efforts for facilitating commercial vehicle development and certification, for safe transportation for NASA astronauts to and from the International Space Station, and working as the deputy project manager with SpaceX for a lot of the different activities. So, and good to see you again, Jon.
Thanks for having me.
So let's get into your story, and let's start with how you got to NASA and space and engineering. I'll start with you, Mike. What got you into this business, and what are some of the key, maybe key steps that got you to where you are right now?
Okay, well, thank you for the invitation to be here, and thank you to all of you guys. Look out, there's a lot of shuttle experience and a lot of people that have launched rockets for a lot of years, so humbling to be up here with these folks. What got me here was really what I always wanted to do. Since I was a little kid, I kept wanting to be in the space program. That was just something that was always there. I don't know where it came from. Just always something I wanted to do. So I spent my kind of life doing science fairs and building models of Columbia and all those things. Went to school for space science. Then I took a little different deviant route that most people might have taken. When 1990 rolled around and I graduated, there was a hiring freeze government-wide. So I found myself with a degree, excitement, passion, ready to go, and then the President of Congress said, well, we're not going to hire for a while. So that kind of turned my tack a little bit. So I did the next normal thing, I sold shoes. Taught high school a little bit, painted houses, did whatever it took to get by for about 5.5 years until the hiring freeze was lifted. So it was a time that I really learned a lot about things as well. But I kind of kept myself engaged. I did crazy things like got a copy of the KC phone book, and a friend kind of snuck it out to me, and I went through there and found about 150 people that looked pretty interesting and wrote them all letters, told them about myself and what I wanted to do one day, and lo and behold, one of the gentlemen that read it was an old Apollo guy, and he read it and ended up getting a phone call and said, hey, you kind of reminded me back in the 60s, and there's nothing happening now, but I'll keep you in mind. And he kept his word, and in 1996, USA was stood up, and I was lucky enough to join USA at that time. So since then, I've been bouncing around. I was a contractor for 9 years, on the engineering side and the integration side of the house, and then joined NASA in 2005, and then joined the NTD, NASA Test Director Office, for the last 9 years as well.
Yeah, so it's passion. You really wanted to do this, and you stayed involved, and it's almost, you can call it shoes to shuttle.
Yeah, that's, I like that.
Yeah, I like it. And Jon, I've known you for a long time, and you always seem to be doing
Decades.
different things. Yeah, fortunately. And you've had a career where you've moved around at different stages, and so give us a little background of how did you get to this point where you are in terms of working commercial crew. And
Well, unlike Mike, I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. I will say that early on I wanted to be a professional football player because in Little League I was a standout. And I didn't much like NASA because when I was a kid, they were launching Mercury, Gemini, and we always, back in those days, they always carried the whole launch on TV, everything. And as a young person, back in those days, if you wanted to watch cartoons, it was only on Saturday morning from 8 until noon. and NASA was always launching on Saturday morning from 8 until noon. So I wasn't a fan of NASA. But then in 1968, on Christmas Eve, I'm in my bed. I'm a 10-year-old kid who wants to be a professional football player. And I'm trying to go to sleep because, you know, Santa is definitely not going to come until you go to sleep. And my mom comes in and says, Johnny, I want to show you something. And she takes me outside, and I can still see it to this day, going out on the back porch and looking out above some of the pine trees out behind our little home. And she said, there's the moon, and there are 3 men from the planet Earth going around the moon right now. And I go back inside, and my dad's got the rabbit ears on the TV, and we sit and listen to Borman, Lovell, and Anders read from the book of Genesis as they were going around the moon. And I don't know why, but that did spark my interest, and it got me very, very interested in wanting to be a part of the NASA program. So I would say I'm lucky in the sense that people from my generation, we have that. We had that sort of a thing, going to the moon, landing on the moon, walking on the moon. That really inspires us, and it goes to my point, which is there's an old saying that if you want to build a ship, don't collect people to gather wood and assign them work and tasks, but rather teach them to long for the endless immensity of the sea. And that's what that did for me, and that's the one thing we need to do, is to continue to inspire people. But on the more mundane, how did I get to be here? So I go to Georgia Tech and graduate very, very luckily. Luckily, my work ethic is much better than my study ethic was. I go into the Air Force out at Vandenberg Air Force Base, where a lot of people, younger people today, don't know that we actually built a shuttle launch pad out at Vandenberg Air Force Base, and we were going to launch secret satellites out of there. Did that for a few years, and then I got very lucky. A gentleman by the name of Larry Ellis was out there, and he liked my work. And Larry said, why don't you come work with us at KSC? And I thought, wow, lifetime dream. I think I'll go do that. And so I came here and I worked. First job I had was working in the Orbiter Project Office, and I can still to this day remember the first time I'm driving up State Road 3 and I see the vehicle assembly building, and I know, being a very avid fan of NASA, I know what's gone on in that building over the years and how cool it is that I get to go here. So I come to KC, I work in the Orbiter Project Office. My very first boss ends up marrying Bob Crippen. So, it was a normal thing to see Bob Crippen coming through my office, and I'm going, wow, this is just so cool. And I do that for a few years. Eventually, I get put on the space station redesign team up in Crystal City back in 1993, where we went from Freedom basically to the ISS. So those years of the project office, I learned all about the orbiter and the space shuttle, how to launch. I knew that technical stuff very, very well. Now I go to Washington and I see politically how this works. And that was very eye-opening as well. That's a whole nother education. I do that, I come back, I eventually work in the space station program, work on a couple of the modules that are up there in space. Then I go back to work in the shuttle program because it's still going on for a very long time. Once I was done with that, though, and during that time I also got to work at the Columbia Reconstruction with some fabulous folks like a guy named Woody Woodworth, just incredible people to work with, and that whole task was something else. But I finish up working in the Orbiter project, seeing that the shuttle program is going to come to an end. I get involved with the Ares 1X project, and to this day, Ares 1X is the single best thing that I have done, because it is the embodiment of every lesson we've ever learned, which is get a small team of people, smart people, give them the task, get out of their way, help them if they need it, if they ask for help. And Jeff Hanley did that, and Bob S. and Steve Davis and Marshall Smith and I, as the leadership of that team, still the most amazing thing I've ever done, what we did in just a few short months with that. And once I got done with that, I went to work over here in commercial crew, and now I get to work with the SpaceX guys, and that is a lot of fun. I think it's a lot like the vibe we had around NASA back in the 60s, a bunch of young kids who aren't fully aware of the awesomeness of what they're doing, and they're very energetic, and I love going out there and working with those guys. So that's what brings me here.
See, you've both been involved in obviously iconic missions, challenges known around the world, historical, certainly from the shuttle station era and going on. I want to get into some of the challenges of teams, because you're talking about the teaming aspects and getting things going. So you're working with commercialization, SpaceX, NASA. What are some of the key challenges in terms of that relationship, and how do you deal with them? How do you work to establish effective teams when you're going across different boundaries.
Obviously, SpaceX, for those of you who've been attentive and watching, SpaceX does business differently, and they're not like NASA. So it's very interesting working across
And they're
that
proud of
boundary.
that.
And they're very proud of that in many ways. I will tell the way the challenge is really set by the very first meeting we had with them. So we have they're awarded commercial crew development to a Space Act agreement, and we go out there, the whole of the NASA commercial program, we go out there and we have the big kickoff meeting, and it's all, yay, excited, we're going to do great things. The program management goes away that day, and then the next day we come in, and I find out from a lot of the SpaceX guys that really what they want is for us just to give them the money and go away. We'll call you when there's something good that's going to happen. And so I thought, wow, this was not what I anticipated. I mean, because I'm NASA, they should listen to me, but these are smart kids. And so what I had to learn to do, and I learned this from other encounters with working with other contractors, is you have to build trust. That's the big thing. They have to understand that you're not there for any other motivation other than to get the right thing done and to help them. And I learned that a lot on Ares 1X with what we had there. But you work very closely with them. You don't say much. You mostly be quiet and listen. I have never in my life learned anything when I was talking. So I listened a lot. When I thought I could offer something, I would. When I thought NASA could offer something, I would offer that up. I did that with my team. I had a team of people working with me. And so over the years, working with them, we have developed that trust. And now there are an awful lot of NASA people that the SpaceX folks are willing to talk to, anxious to talk to. But we're still, even with other groups, we're still trying to build that. And that is a never-ending process. And I will tell you, it's just fantastic. And I continue to learn from my experience with the SpaceX guys.
And it's probably true, because I've heard, obviously, most of my career now has been at headquarters,
right,
with the Academy Project and now Chief Knowledge Office and all that.
Right.
And so you always hear centers saying, we don't need any help from headquarters, just send us the money. And you hear that from divisions so there's always, the nature of a project, particularly the complex missions, is that you're working all these interfaces. Yeah. Same thing with you, Mike. You came, you're involved in contracting industry, USA, NASA. What are some of the key challenges in terms of making a mission work successfully across a dispersed team, and what are some of the ideas for being successful that you have?
From my experience, two big things are communication and understanding each other. I mean, communication, it sounds like it's an easy thing to say, just communicate. But when you look back and you look through all the accident histories and read all the accident reports, I returned from Apollo through Challenger to Columbia, the same systemic themes are coming through. Communication breakdowns, communication was not working. And you look at even smaller projects, close calls, you look through all those reports, it keeps coming back and forth, communication. Kind of following what John said is, there's often a lot of talking, but not a lot of reception. And maybe you hear it, but you don't take it to the next level beyond hearing it. You got to implement that. Not only I hear your message, but what am I going to do about it, and keep reinforcing it. So when you're building teams, especially what my experience is, when you see like a contractor team and then you see the government team, there's misunderstandings. It's different, slightly different languages they speak, slightly different perspectives on how they see the world, and you're both doing the same thing. You're both launching a rocket, and you want to do it safe and successful, right? So it's that communication to make sure you both understand really what you're saying, because often you'll be in meetings and you'll see one group saying something at a high level of voice, and then this voice goes up higher here, and they're saying the same thing, they just don't realize it. I think extending yourself and being able to be bilingual and understanding what the speak is like, understanding what operations folks are concerned about. Engineering has a little different perspective. So understanding the other side of the field, what are they concerned about? Why are they worried about things? Are there valid concerns? Kind of put yourself in the other person's shoes to learn from that. So I've seen that as a very valuable thing across the time. And then it's the effective communication as well. Really just making sure you're doing it effectively, not just sending an email, not just making a phone call, but building those relationships. Making sure
aggressive communication, constant communications.
Right.
Yeah. One of the things also in terms of communications here, I'll encourage you give tough questions, because we have really sharp, capable people here, but we'll get questions shortly. I want to follow up, I guess, on the communications part. because again, SpaceX, NASA, industry, NASA commercialization in general, space is complex because there are always interfaces. You're always working multiple centers, industry, international partners, universities. So what do you see as some of the key challenges in terms of, particularly when you're going across boundaries? Industry, which is entrepreneurial, SpaceX, NASA government, and traditional knowledge of how to do things. What are some of the communication challenges going across the different boundaries, and how do you deal with that? And are there some things you don't communicate, and are there some things that really have to be? How do you work that relationship?
Well, it harkens back to exactly what Mike was saying, to just the communication thing, and you've got to make it personal. And so I even have on my desk a little sign that says, never send an email when a phone call will do. Because when you take an email, you sit there and you write the email, and you craft it, and you will actually spend 10 times longer crafting just the right word, because you're not going to be there to deliver the word, and they won't get the tone. You're trying to convey the right tone. If you would simply talk to it, it's almost like the failure of social media. You don't get the tone. So I encourage people, and beyond that, I encourage face-to-face. A lot of people get very comfortable sitting in their office and just making a phone call instead of walking down the hall or traveling to somewhere. I'm really big on face-to-face. I encourage anybody on my team to travel out and talk to the SpaceX guys face-to-face. What I have seen, this is universal, is when the NASA guys actually go out to SpaceX and they will meet with them one-on-one, the anxiety, the distrust begins to break down. These guys get to know each other, they see each other, they talk, and so you don't have the curtain of an email where you were crafting your words in order to get the whole thing done. And I've learned that over the years dealing with contractors, but also just within NASA. We have the same thing. When I was a young engineer, and there was the usual level of angst between engineering and operations. Back in the day, I used to have a sign on my desk that said, operations uses engineering the same way a drunk uses a light post. Not for illumination, but to keep from falling down. But then you get to know these guys, and now that we're cross-pollinated, and they have the ops side has a very definitive job to go do, engineering, and it's when you talk and you get to know each other that breaks down. So yeah, I encourage that.
Well, it's also, you talk, a lot of people, particularly if you're not at NASA or you're not at engineering, they think of engineering as one field.
Right.
And yet there are hundreds of different disciplines, and a software engineer looks at things differently than an electrical, who looks at things different from a systems. And so that language becomes a key, and then you go to different organizations, it becomes a big issue. What about, Mike, in terms of, do you have any, as a leader, do you have any tools? Do you have any strategies you try to do to build effective communications or the sharing of knowledge?
Yeah, especially in our latest function with the NASA Test Director Office, and our function is leading launch countdown and landing operations. So you're given the responsibility to lead a large team of people that are very, very sharp and that know what they're doing. Kind of like an orchestra. You got different, the windwinds, you got the percussion, all that. And you're kind of the guy with the sticks up there, but those are the real talent guys that are really, playing the music. Understanding the team, how it works, really getting into it. I always said, when we had new engineers, especially coming to TP, or new people that ask my opinion, get out and learn what people are doing. Just because you have the opportunity to direct people or tell them what to do, I don't believe you can do that effectively unless you understand what they're doing, why they're doing what they're doing. So get off of where you're sitting, your console, go in the back of the room, talk to those guys. Watch them do their job, watch them talk about their concerns. Some of the best experience I ever had was when I first started in fuel cells a long time ago. I had a great lead, and he says, just get over to the OPF, over to the processing facility, and just spend time with the techs. And just get to know them and build that relationship and build that knowledge with them. And it was interesting, once you do that, and I saw it the opposite way, when you go in there and you tell them what to do, you'd be surprised how the feedback might not be quite conducive to getting your operations completed when you want to get them completed. So it's building relationships, getting the respect of people. Once you show them you're willing to do that and enter on their side, it's amazing what people do, because they really want, I think people generally want to help you. They want to get you become effective. That's everybody's goal. It's just all the human stuff, right, gets in the way and kind of clogs up the system. So if you kind of break down those barriers, have a little humility. Doesn't matter what position you're in, my humble opinion, if you're center director, if you're just the tech on the floor, talk to each other, ask questions, show the respect, and you'd be surprised. I learned more from those technicians years ago, back in those days in the Bay, than any book I could have read, any class I could have ever taken. And you start with small things, start with the conversations. Maybe you get to carry their toolbox one time. I was so proud when I could do that, because that's a sign of respect. And then you start building that trust. And that helped me when I start writing paper. When they start letting me do that, I could say, okay, what's that tech thinking about? What's in his mind? What's his concerns? Not just me as an engineer, but what is he really worried about? And that helps your career. I'm sure John, you probably could think the same way as, then going to the integration office. Now you're overseeing a little bit more. And now you understand how people are interplaying in the politics, and the whole human dynamics starts to go on. And it just never changes. As a test director, we see that all the time. Understanding it and listening to what your folks are telling you. It's easy to ask a question and want a certain answer, but are you really willing to listen to an answer you might not want to hear, and really get it down there and get that respect built enough so they feel confident enough to trust you with information, because that's part of the equation too, is having them have enough confidence and trust in you that they can share things. We're behind the schedule, we're this, we got this concern. Those are just inner dynamics, right? Like a family. If your teenagers talk to you, you can solve problems a lot sooner and fix things. It's when the communication isn't quite fluid, that's when you start getting the breakdowns, in my opinion.
Yeah. I was talking to the Science Mission Director, Associate Administrator John Grunsfeld, a couple of weeks ago about some of the critical knowledge stuff, and you said something that made me think of that, but he said that he was getting ready to go on vacation, and he went to his house, and they found a mouse. But it was 20 minutes, he had to get to the airport, so he went to the airport. When he came back a few weeks later, a lot of mice. And he said he sees that like a project or a program that we do, is that if you see one, mice, you better look and you better really have intensive communications, because if you stay back, you'll come back and you'll have a whole family living there. And a lot of what you've been talking about at the beginning time is the social risk of different folks, different backgrounds, different ideas, languages coming together, and how do you address that when we naturally tend to look at the technical kind of risk and different approaches there. One of the things that we encourage for project leaders to do is to take reflection time for their team, which is hard to do with NASA engineers and with project people because they're schedule driven. And so the notion of taking time out to talk is why are we doing that? I've had people say, where do we charge talk time to? Do you have, from the standpoint of encouraging reflection on the teams that you work with, and in terms of cutting across the boundaries, do you have any advice in terms of how do you do that? Do you do that at the start of a mission? Do you do it in the middle? Do you have time frames for when you try to just say, hey, let's stop and talk about what's working, what's not? Is it after something goes wrong or something goes well? Either of you.
For me, it's all the above. There's really no earliest time to start, and there's no time to end it. It's a continuous process. I think in operations we do that a lot. In a lot of the tests we do things called post-tests. And I think they're critical because the folks will do something, get together, and then start sharing, hey, this worked great, but this didn't work so good. So carrying that knowledge on is great. Keep that communication going and keep that, just keep it flowing is critical. But it doesn't have to be after an accident. Unfortunately, sometimes it's like anything, right? Your sensitivities are heightened after an accident, and you're all driving down 95 and you see a car wreck or something, and whoa, man, my hands are like this. I'm shaking like a leaf, right? I'm watching, and I'm every single thing on the road, and man alive, I'm focused. And then a few miles go down the road, and all of a sudden, shoulders relax, and you just kind of, then maybe the radio goes back on a few more miles, and it's human nature to do that. It isn't something you can just push a button and you become in this mode. That's human nature. And referencing back to the reports, and I'm kind of a soapbox I get on, but you can learn so much from the different reports, from the Apollo 204 through Rogers to the Cape report. And you'll see so many systemic things in there again. And there are lessons that were learned at the time, but then we learned them again, and then we learned them again. and you could almost cut and paste sections of the reports out one after another. And it's a bit frustrating when you do that. So is it a factor of human nature? It probably is. We're just all human, right? We all make mistakes, and we all kind of forget things, and Lord knows I do that all the time. So I think that's just a part of life. So reinforcing it, having leadership, be it the big kahuna on top, or be it down to the supervisor level, making a culture in your organization that not just says it, but walks the walk, talks it, reinforces it, maybe sets aside time to do, I know in our group we used to do that tribal knowledge talk and kind of lessons learned. We'd have hey, back in this flight, this happened. And I think that was really valuable because you start sharing all those little nuggets that were little seeds in your mind. So when you're sitting on console, in our case, wow, I remember back, I heard that story 20 years ago this happened. Geez, I don't want that to happen again. So sharing that knowledge, lessons learned is critical to keep doing it.
What about you, John? Do you do anything formal to get that reflection time, or?
What I like to do and what I don't see us do enough of. So we learn the lesson during Mercury and Gemini during launch countdown, which is a fairly focused activity. When you're in launch countdown, we establish these things called built-in holds. And these are times when no significant work was scheduled, and you could go fix the problems that you were having. What I would love to see done, and I don't see very often, but something I try to do in a large project, is set out a schedule for when I need to get to completion, and then have little, what I would call built-in holds where there's no activity. And those are times to catch up. You're going along and you have problems, so that's the time, that weekend or that week, whatever, you go through and that gives you the opportunity to catch back up and solve the problems that you've had. Without that, and it's an incentive to people not to not have problems, but to try to minimize them and work them as best they can, because they would like to have that little free time to catch up and do the other things. Because when you're in the midst of a project and things are happening very, very quickly, you lose track of some other things. They fall off the table because you are so focused on this. So I would love to see that happen, and it's something that I try to do, but I just don't see it a lot in the way we do project scheduling.
Yeah. Well, we're focused on the time, getting things done, and
Right.
Sometimes the belief that if you keep moving forward, then it's better than taking the time out. In terms of some of the work, obviously groups do lessons learned at different points, and they do. One of the things that's popular in different places is pre-mortems, where you will stay, okay, let's assume that working together or our mission has failed before it's happened. What will have gone wrong to cause that failure? Do you do that, or do you ever see that, or the pre-mortem type activities?
We did something similar to that on Ares 1X, and I will tell you that Dave Lingell up at headquarters,
Right.
He has done a wonderful job of videotaping all of us in the leadership positions for Ares 1X. And that's one of the things that's in there, is we talked about. So let's think about the end result and what we would do, and that of course makes you think of the things that might have gone wrong as you're getting to this point. So it's a valuable tool. You need to be thinking ahead. There's study after study that's been done among senior managers in private corporations and within the government, and they all talk about, I don't have enough time to plan, to really sit down and just think ahead about all the things that I need to do, and we need that.
Yeah, and dovetailing what you're saying there is, like, you go back through all the accidents, time and schedule pressure was a huge factor in not being able to do that. I mean, 1967 was a time where we were racing toward 69 to get to the moon. So there's a lot of different factors, but one of them was schedule pressure, right? You've got to get to that point. So carving out that time to have those meetings and conversations and timeouts, hard to do, right? So you got that. Challenger was the same thing, getting the shuttle program up and going. You've got a big backlog of Defense Department and interplanetary probes. You've got to keep going. You can't stop now. You've got to show a profit. In Columbia, we were racing towards core complete on station and getting ready for station assembly flight, so we had to get, so there's always those elements. You can't avoid those are always going to be part of it.
There's always pressure, right.
I think taking some times out, one thing we do in the programs, was a lot of simulation as we could fit in. I had the honor for some time to lead the launch team, simulation team, and some of the folks in the audience here were also leads at times as well. And that was a great experience, because that was a time where we kind of, almost effectively took a day out, took some time out, and trained towards those pre-events, worst case scenarios, days that you didn't want to have, And we've kind of stressed those over and over again, and which was kind of satisfying for me and some of the folks that ran through some of those sims as well. I think you get is, you ran through a sim, you dealt with something, right? And then you came back later, and that actually happened during a real launch. Right. STS-135, we had the same thing with the ARM, but we had sim that years before that. So it was kind of good to see that the folks had kind of been through this. So those times outs I think are critical to train, and you can do that in a formal simulation. You can do that sitting in an office saying, hey guys, here's our history. What went wrong back in your day? What went wrong? What can you share? And that tribal knowledge is, it got us through as NTDs, I think, extensively, and I really, it doesn't matter if you're a test director or if you're, what office you're in, I think it's greatly valuable to share those lessons, reinforce those lessons, because people will come and go, right? You start losing some of that gray beard experience, and then you have to have those younger guys somehow get it on them, right? So they can take that and carry that forward.
Yeah. And also, obviously, the simulations ultimately is about learning. And so we're talking about communication, trust, building, and a lot of this has to do with the need to adapt in this business, and that's that learning quotient. Absolutely. So let me start going to some of the questions that we have from your colleagues and friends. So one of the first things we have here is that we've been talking a lot about the importance of communication and communication challenges between NASA, contractors, customers, management. How do you handle a person or an organization that does not want to listen? How do you address that? Do you come up with people who it's not going to happen no matter how hard you're trying it, no matter how hard you're trying to make it work, or listen, or organizational entities that do that? And how do you deal with that as a leader?
Well, I would, it reminds me of an old cliche that I had to modify. The old one was recognition of the problem is half the cure. And I've run across enough people to have modified it to where I now say recognition of the problem as a problem is half the cure. They don't recognize that it's a problem. So you open up the communication and you try to get them to understand. So yes, I have run across the very circumstance where you're trying to tell someone you really understand what the situation is. You don't think they quite get it. And I would tell you 9 times out of 10, because I'm very cautious with myself about thinking this way, you find out that they didn't get it. But there is that occasional circumstance where you're the one who's actually not getting it. And so you just have to work with them. Eventually, it's happened to everybody, where you get someone who is just not going to listen, and then it's time for a change. And that's and those are one of the hardest things you do is do that to some folks. You will run across people who are very sincere, very hardworking, and they're not going to get it. And that's when you get paid to be a leader and go make a change.
Yeah, like how do you deal with a person that isn't getting it, or the organization or the other location that doesn't seem to want to hear?
I think you change your tack, just like sailing. If you can. I've seen situations where, some solutions in some lines are raise the volume up, raise the threat level up. There's all kinds of different techniques and tools. My humble opinion, the most effective ones I've seen is you find the way you connect. We're all human beings. We all have similar interests in ways we think of things. So everybody is different. I see that when I do a lot of tours of the Columbia Preservation Room. Mm-hmm. And my objective in there is when I get very diverse people through from everyone from secretaries on through to the administrator, and then all different centers and all different perspectives, and everybody's got their thing. How do I connect to them? Because each group is a little bit different, right? The interns, you're going to get to them a little bit differently than you're going to get to a senior level manager or director. So constantly reading your audience, understanding what your audience is there for, understanding what your audience background is, how they receive a message. So really, it's a lot of learning about them more so than funneling to them. In my opinion, I've seen more response to that is, and then watching your audience as you're speaking or leading a program. You can learn so much, and John harkened back to that a while ago as well, when you turn down the audio going out and you let the audio coming in be a little more amplified. It is amazing. Those people are telling you so much, and a lot of the solutions are there if you just listen. And if you don't understand it, then you ask a follow-up. But a lot of the solutions aren't that hard. It's just listening for them and working together. And when that happens, it's incredible. And you can watch it. I'll do it because I'll be leading a tour or a group, and if I'm off a little bit, you can kind of see interest in you watching body languages. I'm like, okay, certain things that I'm trying to impart to them is not, I can feel it. It's not quite getting through. So then that's incumbent upon me as a person leading that tour to change my tack, to change it. And what is going to be, and then you kind of tweak the knobs a little bit, right? And you kind of get your focused in message. And you hopefully then you start watching the perking up and the attitude and the dynamics change a little bit. So that's on a small scale. I think on a big scale, it's probably no different, right? If you're a leader of an organization or a team, whatever you're doing, watching your people, listening to them. They're giving you all the answers, giving you all the clues. And I think some of the greatest supervisors and managers I've had are the ones that really have that feedback, have a sense of what's going on. And not just, here's my talking points, here's my message, I'm going to say it, and I'm going to keep saying it until you believe it. I humbly think you're more effective if it's a two-way approach.
Right.
Yeah,
It's like you're a horse whisperer, it sounds like. You're a human whisperer.
Right.
Sorry.
I would say that's very important. Two monologues do not constitute a dialogue.
Right.
And when you sit and you start listening to folks, that's when you start making
It's the
breakthrough.
exchange, right, yeah. And I didn't mean to equate people you work with as horses, Well, I love horses.
didn't say it.
We have a SpaceX, question, answer question, and what's
That's
the
unusual.
biggest? Unusual, yeah, I'm sure you're shocked. What's the biggest difference between the culture at SpaceX and at NASA?
Oh, that's easy. It boils down to one thing: everything. The biggest difference is they're young. They aren't necessarily.
Well, some of us are
aware.
young.
Yeah.
No, not us, but, they're
But
young
the
people.
SpaceX folks are by and large in the engineering staff. The numbers I've heard is the average age of a SpaceX engineer is around 28 years old,
Wow.
which equates to a lot of what we were like back in the 60s during Apollo. I mean, when Apollo 11 landed on the moon, the old man in the room was Gene Kranz at age 35, and I think most of his flight controllers were under the age of 30. So they are anxious to do it right, and they don't necessarily know the way we've always done it. But we will talk to them about it, and what we have to do to bridge that culture gap is again, communicate and listen to what they're saying, how they want to go do something. We don't own the monopoly on the right way to do everything. There's a few things we probably do pretty well, and we should probably stick with some of those. So we got to find out what those are. But the SpaceX folks, their willingness to accept risk is orders of magnitude greater than what ours is. They haven't been burned as many times as we have. But I tell them, I see SpaceX, you're becoming a little more like us every day, because what happens with them is the same thing happens with us. Something goes wrong, you say, well, boy, we look stupid when that happened. I'm going to implement this, this, and this so that I don't do that again. And little by little, things like that creep into their culture, and it also helps them understand the way we are and how we got to be the way we are.
And a follow-up to that is, how do you build bridges between NASA and SpaceX? How do you build bridges of two significantly different organizations?
Once again, it's a matter of building trust. Going back to what Mike said, we both have the same goal in mind, which is safe space flight. And there's more than one way to go do it. If we will simply listen to them and tell them the benefit of our experience and work with them. Don't come into the meeting and try to pontificate about you've done this, that, and don't recite your resume every time you come into the room. They'll get it. If you're that smart and you're that good, they're going to pick up on that. They're smart kids. But you've just got to build that trust level with them, and it takes time. You are not going to do it in a month, 6 months, or a year. It's going to take multiple years working with them.
And so this is a question for Mike. And again, you spoke about building trust and making things work by communications, making sure people are being heard. What advice do you have for a young professional who's working on a project and they don't feel that they are being heard?
Okay.
How do you're the young person and you don't feel you're being heard by folks. How do you deal with that?
Okay, a couple of different ways. One, the first one is don't just stop and just say they don't care about me, they don't respect me because I'm young. Don't do that, because that manager or director really probably wants that answer. He's searching for that. They want that. So you assume, you can have assumptions, right? And you're probably putting them on yourself, and they're not real valid concerns and assumptions. There's a variable of tools, and one of the things I mentioned on some of the tours and talks I give for Columbian Challenger is learn all the mistakes that we made. When it comes to communication, how are you communicating? You referenced emails before like that. If you go back through a lot of the CABE report and different things, a lot of it was email traffic. Okay, and you send an email traffic, and you see some people send it with caps, right, and little smiley faces and all kinds of kind of cool little things. Well, what does that mean? What are you really trying to communicate? Because sitting down, looking face to face into somebody's eyes, and making that connection between two people is very different, in my humble opinion, than it is the punctuation marks and all that stuff. And you can also, how many times have we all read emails, and you go, I can't believe they're upset at me. I can't believe they don't get. I can't believe this. I can't believe. Really? I mean, can you really that? Maybe. I can't, maybe I'm missing some body language there, but I think there's so much more effective if it's just, like I said, picking up the phone, going across the hall, talking, because it's a lot harder to not want to listen to somebody when you're talking face to face with them, when you sit down and just extend that humility and say, can you help me understand what you're thinking? Can you help me with a problem? It's hard for some people, hard for all of us to do at times, right? But if you can just do that and approach them and try to get that conversation started, keep doing that, and I encourage them in those conversations. Be innovative. Build consensus. If you've got a problem and you've got a concern for your team or for the launch or whatever level it's at, build a consensus. Go to coworkers, go to other people, and try to bounce it off of them. Right? Do a sanity check. Try to build those people around you, saying, "Is this right? Is this?" So build some of that consensus to go forward. If you don't want to just go up your chain, or if your chain isn't receptive to that, and then if you exhaust all those levels, go up the chain, do what you got to do. And I don't want to tell people just to run into Bob's office and bang his door down or attack the poor man. But a lot of the managers do have an open door policy. A lot of them, and if they say that, take them up on it. Go and sit down with them. Do it respectfully, but have that conversation with them. They're probably more receptive than you might think. And the last thing I'll leave you with on this one is, it's always easy to say that stuff, right? This is just easy and fun things to say, and we do that. But anybody that's been in a launch readiness review or flight readiness review, it is a scary place to be. And I'm sure that goes with other team meetings. I've been in those meetings, and a lot of you folks in this room have been there too. You're in that room, right? And you've got a concern. Your boss is there, his boss, his boss, his boss. A couple bosses even above him are there, right? You got everybody in the world's there. Maybe Charlie Bull, our administrator, is there. All these guys are there, right? And you want to come forward and say, I've got a concern or problem. And I've seen people do that, okay? Your knees are knocking, right? You're doing the Macarena, whatever you're doing. So you're nervous. It's human nature. Because when you get out of that seat and do that, you're, in your mind, often putting your reputation on the line. Maybe you think you're putting your job on the line, your future promotion potential on the line, your credibility. You're putting all of this, self-assumed in a lot of cases, but you're putting this all on yourself. Those are all things to weight you down, right? So you stand up, the lights will turn on, you'll think you're on in Broadway, right? All the lights will focus on you, and then all of a sudden, the whole room stops, even Charlie turns around and looks at you. And now you got to explain yourself. More often than not, at least the cases I've seen, you never come forward with the smoking gun, right? I don't think I've ever seen that. It's come forward, well, here's my position, and here's my gray scale set of data. So what happens after you present this, right? After you get the fear out, and then people give you those looks like, I can't believe you just stood up. Now you got people going to shoot arrows at it. Well, to some level, I think that's a healthy exchange, right? Engineers and scientists, you should challenge data. You should challenge each other professionally and say, no, that's a healthy exchange. That's great. But it can also go to the limit on the other end of a not healthy exchange, okay? That you're shouting down dissent or questions. So that's where the management comes in, keeping that culture allowable to get that person to go do that. I always tell them, whatever you need to draw upon to get that out of that seat. And I often suggest to them, I said, if you ever face this, and I hope you never do, I said, think back to today in the room. Look around. You see, this was the most beautiful spaceship you could imagine a few years ago. I says, and here's where she is today. I says, and the folks that lived through that went out in the fields to pick it up, did the reconstruction of the hangar, lived through the aftermath. I said that was an unbelievably painful experience.
Yeah, and obviously in terms of really, when I think about the question, it's, you've been involved in Columbia preservation and probably lessons from Challenger, so it has extra meaning of the importance of, don't turn off, of not saying something. It's vital in this place. And you hear that from all NASA folks, particularly the folks who've been around a long time, is don't go silent. Keep finding a way to do it and getting the word out. But it's also the things that, as we're talking, and it can be an intimidating place. I remember when I started at NASA, and I'm in the room with people who worked Apollo, and I'm 20. I mean, Apollo was, still is. It's like it's unbelievable. And I remember seeing the administrator come in, and then you think God's in the room, and I was just trying to keep quiet so no one would think I'm dumb. But it's very important in our environment, if you say something, to be able to bring it up. And unfortunately, most social psychology research says people who see things most accurately are the newest ones in a room or in a family, because you see what's going on, but those are the ones less likely to say, hey, things don't seem to be going on there. Got an interesting, maybe a tough question, because in this case, the person wants an example. You've worked with different teams that have had conflicts, probably big conflicts, maybe between a center and another center, or between divisions, or how do you deal with conflict between teams and across team organizations, and give an example of how do you deal with it and what you've done in the past? So, have either of you had ever conflicts?
Oh, no, it's been just a love affair all the time. You deal with varying levels of conflicts. I'm trying to think of what would be one of the better examples. That is a good question, because you want a concrete, and of course I don't want to give away any names. So I would say there was
What about people who've had conflict with you? You could know.
Yeah, I can't even conceive of that. I know I have. I will tell you that most of the leadership lessons I have learned over time come from my own failures as a leader, as opposed to watching other people. So that's an excellent way to learn. Watch yourself and learn from mistakes that you make. But there was I was working on a component on one of the modules for the space station, and we had one young engineer who had a very good idea, and I wanted to support that idea. My management didn't agree. There was another center that did not agree. So how do you handle that? We continued to push it, and you do it respectfully.
Right.
Well, that's the important thing, is you recognize that there's talent everywhere. People are smart. That's one of the hard things when you're at NASA. When you walk into any room here at NASA, odds are pretty good you're not the smartest person in the room. So there's an awful lot of smart people around here. But we did it respectfully. I helped because it's as a leader, you want to support your people. And so we took the message forward, went through one board, did the thing where, okay, we went as high as we could go here in this part of the program, and like the technical authority, we said, okay, we want to take this to one higher level. And we did that, and so there's one person who's allowed to accept risk, and this really was kind of a risk thing, and it's the program manager. Program manager got to hear what it was, listened very thoughtfully, and eventually ruled against us. Didn't go with it. But the person we were so concerned about, who was bucking the system, has had a very successful career, because, like I said, you gain people's respect when you are willing to respectfully disagree and present a cogent case in your favor.
Right. No, that's a good example. You had obviously different. Not only do you have your leadership, but you have another center, basically opposed, and so keep working and looking for different ways to go about it. Any good examples of conflict, or have you been totally conflict-free?
Well, yeah.
Okay.
Perfect. No. I've got examples, and like I said, you don't want to use names and faces and stuff. I can give two different generalities, probably be safe to do. But we face that a lot.
Everyone's already figuring out who it is.
Who it is, that's right. They're all like, oh my God, it's me, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yes, it is you. No, we face a lot of different levels of conflicts, say during launch countdown. We have different things come up. Anybody that's walk, work, launch countdown, you've got your schedule, you've got your bar charts, you've got all your plans. Looks pretty, you practice it, you get ready for it, you do that. Well, it never works that way. It's just nature throws in all kinds of stuff, right? All these little crazy little things happen and throws you off. And that raises blood pressures, right? Different people have different blood pressures because you have different things happening. Everybody's job or concern is the biggest thing to them. I have to do this at this time. I have these commodities over here. I have personnel over here. I've got weather. You get all these different things happening. So everybody's got in their life the biggest concern. So what you kind of have to do, I think, two things. One, to lead the team, you've got to have an understanding of what the pecking order is, so you can actually to work through that.
Right.
But even on top of that is it goes back to respect and understanding about other people, because for me, if this console or this position has a concern and they're just, it's the sky's falling, it doesn't behoove me as an effective leader, I don't believe, to, answer his pipe down, get quiet, and go away. You've got to show that respect, because unintendedly, by sending a message of, I don't want to hear your things, you take that on yourself. What does that mean? I don't want to hear your message all the time. They don't respect my console. I'm not as important as this other. So you can send very unintended messages to people, right? I think if you do that. So you got to handle it very carefully and use the diplomatic parts of it. And in that system, right, that person, that is the biggest thing in the world. And I want him to think it is. Because even though in the big picture it may not be the biggest fire burning, in his mind it is. And I want him to feel like it is. Because that's what we have that person do, right? He's protecting his interests, his assets, as very best he can. So instead of just shutting them down, I would want to show more of respect for that. I may have to diplomatically kind of say, you kind of manage the crisis, but it just goes back down to relationships and building that relationship and showing the respect.
Right. You want the mission to be successful, but you're also managing the
Right.
relationship, so you get the honesty.
Because
in the
later
future.
on, exactly,
Right.
Ed, because later on, the next mission, that same guy may have the biggest
Yeah.
fire, and he may not want to
Yeah.
report everything back to you because of, right, we all remember back when people said whatever to us or this happened to us. We're just human beings, that we
Yeah.
carry all that baggage with us. So the less baggage you can create as a leader, I think, it just helps you do your better job, and then people to grow as well.
Yeah, no, I mean, I've seen, senior administrators who,
Right.
very brilliant, but they would clear out a room. They would just explode, and then they would be surprised that they didn't get questions. It's like, well, because the living were brutally hurt, and so they've learned kind of to be
Yeah,
quiet.
the worst thing you can do is see the office outside a senior manager's office is stained with the blood of dead messengers.
Yeah.
That's the worst thing.
That's the message there. We're coming down to just a few minutes, incredibly, and so quick answers. I guess there are two things I wanted to get a sense, from what you both do. How do you balance the need to be innovative, and everyone's always asking NASA, SpaceX to be innovative, do new things, do cutting edge, but don't fail, to manage risk. So how do you manage innovation, but also doing disciplined project management and engineering? How do you, and quick answers.
Quick answer, lightning round.
Lightning round, yeah.
The first thing I'd say is they're not mutually exclusive, for sure. I think you have to have a proper balance of both of them. You encourage both. You mentioned SpaceX a lot, and even the folks that are working SLS, there's a lot of innovation they want to bring into operations, into the engineering aspects of it. I think that's great. Bringing the technology up to the 21st century now, right, is a good idea. But there's limits. There's trade-offs. So you have to have that understanding of what you're getting for it. So it goes back to really understanding what you're getting out of it. Where the
So you
innovation
can
is.
do both,
Right,
and
because
you gotta
there's a
work
wealth of knowledge. If you go back to the Apollo guys did stuff, the way the Shuttle guys did stuff, there is a wealth of knowledge, amazing knowledge. Some of it's what not to do, but there's also a great wealth of what to do. So my humble opinion is for the folks that work on new programs, look back to some of the Shuttle program. You got 30 years of amazing talent, amazing experience. Draw upon some of that.
Right.
And the stuff that's not so good,
Learn
okay,
from
don't
what
do.
happened and
Learn from what
then
happened,
adapt.
so, but then again, don't be afraid to innovate. So it's a balance.
Right.
There's really no cut answer, but they're not mutually exclusive.
Okay. And John, you have even less time. than-
Yeah, so what I'll do is I will go to our modern concept of risk. We have institutionalized risk. When I first started, we would talk about things were risky, but there were no risk management systems. That is a fairly recent development. So what I would say about risk systems is they are a tremendous tool. And they allow somebody is the person who can accept risk. And you need to make sure this gets to that person. But don't waste too much of your time, and I see this all the time. Within the risk management tool, people arguing about whether something should be a 3 or a 4 or a 5. You spend more time arguing about that than you do solving the problem and retiring the risk. So keep in mind when you folks are using risk management systems, they are just a tool. They are not the risk itself. If you think it's a 3, 4, or 5, go ahead and make it a 5. In the long run, it's not going to make any difference. So please, wise use of your management.
Wise use of risk. Final question, again, still lightning round, so I'll start with John. Who's been a key mentor that really shaped you, got you to where you are, and the importance for you in terms of your career, who you learned from?
I'll be real quick. I was one of those people who thought I can do it all on my own.
Your mother you're talking about?
And so I cannot say that I've had a person who mentored me.
Okay.
And so by virtue of that experience and seeing what I've been through, I highly recommend a mentor for everybody. It'll make your life a little bit, you will learn faster.
Yeah.
Back in the old days, I would say, there was less tendency to have mentors.
Yeah.
But there were people who were lucky and got them because the senior manager would pick them. Versus one of us nowadays, anybody can now go and say, hey, I would love for you to help mentor me. I think that's a better way to go do business. You learn faster,
Right.
and it's a better experience for everybody.
Yeah. And you mentioned several people at the beginning who had an impact, like Larry Ellis and others.
Right.
Mike, last question, who has been a key mentor for you and shaping to?
Yeah, mentor for me, of course, you have family and friends and all that, and leaders. I think some of the best mentors I've had have been, they didn't even know they were mentors to me. There was no official mentor program. It was somebody that took the time to spend a few minutes talking to me after a test. Somebody in the hallway saying, hey, did you look at it this way? Watching how other people work meetings and work with people. I think those people that they have no clue that they gave something very valuable to me, but there's hundreds of them. There's people in this room I can point to right now that did it, and there's lots of other people in the Space Center that did it that I learned invaluable things from them. Some things maybe I do a little different, but in an awful lot of cases stuff that they were just being themselves, but to me that was an amazing lesson to be learned, so they're all over the place.
And with my mentors, probably my best ones were my peers.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you've been a tremendous hour. It's gone really, really fast. Really, it's been an honor for me to be with you guys. You're ultimate professionals, and you do cool things. That really comes through. And so let's thank Mike and John. And so,